Just wanted to get started today. We're going to have a conversation about driving measurable EBITDA impact with IT with regards to deal flow. And with me here today, we've got the panelists, Miguel Sanchez and Manan Thakkar. And I'm Eric Codorniz, moderator. Just a little bit of background real quick. I'm a co-founder of Synoptek and have been really driving a lot of our own acquisitions over the years, but also driving the PE efforts with regards to deal sourcing and delivery, due diligence, etc., with both Miguel and Manan. Our SVP, Advisory Consulting, Synoptek, Miguel, he advises against sponsor-backed deals, organizations with strategy, consulting, value creation across complex M&A environments. And the Manan Thakkar, our practice director over consulting, really architects data, platforms, and solutions, really helping organizational value creation post-close and even prior to deals getting done. So with that, we'll start off. Sorry, Miguel, Manan, you want to say hi? Appreciate you guys joining us.
Hello, everyone.
Excellent.
Yep.
Miguel,
yes. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
Yep. Glad to be here.
All right. So just jumping in here real quick, I want to set the stage, right? If you look at these four numbers on the slide, right, they tell one story. 20 to 40% higher IT operating costs after the deal closes, right? Slipped integration timelines, EBITDA targets missed by an average of 8 to 15% against the original deal thesis. And the cause is hiding in plain sight, right? Only 28% of PE-backed portcos run structured IT diligence before the LOI. So we're all signing deal thesis with quantified value in them, while the team responsible for actually delivering that value shows up after the price is set. The cost overrun feeds the integration delay, and the delay pushes synergies out a quarter or two, and the EBITDA target slips. So it's not three problems, it's one problem with three downstream effects. The implication for everyone here is pretty straightforward. In a 10 to 12 multiple environment with investor expectations for measurable value creation continue to climb, IT is no longer a support function. It's essential to value creation, growth, and risk mitigation. The portcos that figured this out early outperform. The ones that don't end up explaining the gap to their LPs. And that's the focus for the hour. So I want to just walk through the deal life cycle with Miguel and Manan and just see where IT is moving EBITDA needle and where it's quietly leaking value. So let's jump in. So again, deal discussion walking through, right? Sourcing, pre-LOI, into the due diligence, the first kind of day one through day 100, the hold period beyond that, of course, add-ons, and then pre-exit and the actual exit. Should be about a 60-minute presentation. We'll get some Q&A if anybody has questions, and then we'll close out after that. Sound good? Miguel, Manan, you ready?
Yep.
All right.
Get in.
So stage one, sourcing pre-LOI. So Miguel, maybe you could lead with this one. You know, at what point in the funnel should IT show up? And what does an IT aware sourcing process actually look like in practice?
Yeah. So when you think back over the past 10 years, things have changed even over the past 20. IT definitely becoming more present in organizational strategy, objectives. At the same time, IT can get in the way. It can be prohibitive to growth, introduce risk. So it's really about setting the foundation early to ensure the investment thesis is met and achieved. So I would say good timing is around the indication of interest, right, prior to the LOI. The cost of waiting post LOI is that the deal team they commit to a price, and what they don't have is a full and comprehensive view of the IT spend baseline, technical debt, what's the modernization opportunity, what's the complexity of the post-merger integration or the carve-out. So all of this is critical and important to really shaping the deal early, and understanding, kind of how the objectives unfold over time of the investment. So you want to kind of get to it before the bid's already in. So some of the things that, we're really looking for is, what is the current IT spend as a percentage of revenue? So what's the benchmark and how does that compare to what's going on in the market in general? What's the TSA exposure? As we all know, and we'll talk a little bit about that, later in the presentation, is how does that impact, deal value, deal leakage, et cetera. Third is, and important, and we're all aware of this, is a cybersecurity risk, right? What's the posture? Are there any recent incidents? What's the insurance status? When was the last assessment date? What's the current solution in place? So all of this is to get a very quick snapshot. We're talking maybe a day or two to really understand at a high level, what the technology ecosystem looks like, its posture, its risk, its opportunity, and that will help shape, the deal going forward.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Okay. Again, pre-LOI, right? So now let's get into diligence, stage 2, right? So where all the magic happens. Before, I just want to set the stage because I think, if we look at the bigger picture, and we just had a recent engagement to give an example of value, right? Targeted IT, due diligence, and the execution surfaced $4 million in annualized EBITDA. And again, when we're talking 10 to 12 times multiples, that's a $40 to $50 million enterprise value on exit, right? So again, 3 moves in this particular example, all repeatable, CapEx to OpEx migration that reset the run rate, right? SaaS license audit paid for the engagement initially in year 1, and an 18-month vendor renewal calendar, right, that caught 2 auto renewals at unfavorable pricing before they even hit. And again, the point isn't this deal. The point is that the playbook's repeatable, and most portfolios are leaving the same value on the table. So again, just want to keep that in mind to continue setting the stage for this. So question, Miguel, walk us through what a credible IT due diligence delivers and what separates a checklist from an actual thesis defensible work product.
Yeah, I do think it's really getting to specifics. When you look back to the previous slide, the 4 million EBITDA improvement to 40 million enterprise value, to get to that, it really needed a thesis defensible due diligence process as opposed to a checklist. So what I mean by that is, what does the deliverable and the outcome of due diligence deliver? It informs the deal team what to pay, what to fix, what's the roadmap, what's the cost of executing that roadmap, really thinking through the value at proposed exit and what does that mean and what's it going to take to get there and achieve that value. So a checklist, on the left-hand side here is a little bit generic. It identifies the opportunity. For example, if there's sprawl or a security opportunity, it defines it at that level. The thesis defensible diligence is really understanding, the rationale of the transaction, what's the plan, and then coming up with specifics and economics on exactly how this is going to play out and be very detailed, specific, understanding IT spend. Eric mentioned licensing, so understanding the licensing, doing an audit of licensing to make sure that there's opportunity there to identify the opportunity to consolidate and or get rid of. So it's really about the specifics, understanding and ensuring that the executive leadership team, private equity, the investment community really understands the impact of these technology decisions to the P&L. Because if you think of each stage within the transaction, there's value identification, which is really upfront during your due diligence. Value creation is where we're starting to execute on that, and that has to be specific with a specific objective, and then we move into value protection prior to exit. So all of these things have to come together, and I would really say that the getting actionable and specific about the savings, the opportunity, the revenue opportunities is critical here.
Thanks, Miguel. And again, what I've seen as well, just to add to that, is it's really about the dollars that we tie to things, right? It's the P&L, not just a generic, vague statement. It's the $1.8 million, specifics to your point, very specific and actionable across the board. So, all right, next question. Manan, why don't you take this one, right? So fear-based cybersecurity risk modeling is becoming table stakes. For a CFO who's never seen one, what does it actually tell them that is the generic cyber assessment does not?
That's a good point, actually. And let me start with what exactly is this FAIR cybersecurity risk assessment framework. So it's a factor analysis of information risk, and that's the only international standard quantitative model designed to translate the cybersecurity and the operational risk into a financial term. Now, the biggest issue that we face is the traditional cyber assessments that we do rarely give any kind of insights to CFO to make a business decision. Like, okay, if your ransomware controls are not meeting, or if there are issues with how your backups are protected, there's no way you can figure out that what loss that I'm going to incur if something is not right or something is going to get into a problem. So it produces, like a normal cyber assessment produces the technical findings, but they don't quantify operational or financial exposures. So instead of just saying that you have weak ransomware controls, I would say that this creates a realistic annualized exposure of several $1 million through downtime, recovery costs, regulatory impact, or business interruptions. Now, that changes the whole conversation completely, because now cyber has become comparable to every other operational risk on the balance sheet. And the second major benefit is actually the prioritization, because most portcos have dozens of security findings for them to look at, but only handful materially threaten the EBITDA or insurability and getting the cyber insurance and all of that, and also the end integration timelines. And specifically, once we go down further, we can look at how it impacts the value creation as well. So this FAIR assessment actually helps leadership to focus investments where it actually reduces the enterprise risk instead of just overspending broadly on various controls. And during the due diligence, that becomes incredibly valuable, because buyers can establish between the manageable cyber debt versus issues that could materially affect valuation or a post-close execution. So I think FAIR actually turns the cyber from just a regular technical audit into more of a financial decision-making framework. And we have seen that quite recently as well, like a blunt statement after any assessment happens, like, okay, you guys talked all this technical stuff that how it's going to impact us. And this is where the framework kind of clearly stands out and give a real quantification of what kind of dollar impact that we are seeing and how we can prevent that by making certain investment as well. So that's the advantage of doing this.
Yeah, it really quantifies the value and residual risk there. So
yeah,
great. Okay, let's jump to the TSA, right? The next kind of part of due diligence. So the transition services agreement is where deals quietly leak value, right? What are the 3 things you wish every buyer asked the seller about before signing that? Listen for both of you, but Miguel, why don't you go ahead and jump in first?
Okay, so maybe I'll answer this question, with questions, right? So I guess the first is, what's the scope of the TSA? So what's out, what's in, and then, what do they mean potentially by best effort versus, full support? So I do think that, the terms of the TSA are opportunities for value to leak. If the services that are being managed and supported are not being measured, that can create issues and challenges. In some cases, sellers are really not incentivized, or what is their incentive to deliver well, deliver on time? What recourse does the buyer have? So all these things being defined within the TSA are critical. I think the second is just understanding the cost model. So what is the cost per service outlined in the scope of the TSA? What are the off-ramp dates? So how does that roadmap look, and how does that align to the post-merger or carve-out plan? What are the penalties for extensions? So we do know that sellers charge a premium for extensions. And again, if they're not incentivized to kind of get off that TSA, how do we manage that? How's that measured? And as we all know, 6 months of penalties can really start to dig into that value and eat away at the rationale of the transaction and some of those synergies. The third would be, who's the named owner on the seller side? So who's ultimately accountable? Who's our day-to-day contact? Because they are critical in the success of the execution of getting out of the TSA. And where challenges do happen is when that ownership or accountability isn't well defined on the seller side. Who do you go to? How do you really drive and make an impact change and escalate? So these three things I think need to be asked and ensure that they're well defined within the TSA and the terms of the TSA.
Yeah, Manan, would you add anything?
I think that's really great how Miguel outlined. I would say more from an execution side, there are areas where we consistently lose the value or you see the leakage. I would start with identity and access dependency. Most buyers underestimate how deeply their target relies on sellers' Active Directory, email environment, their VoIP systems, and the security stack, and the shared infrastructure where multiple applications are running, something is coming out, something stays with the previous owner, etc. Now, the hidden issue is many TSAs are operationally dependent or doesn't have fully documented dependency that we should have on the very first day. Now, if the separation planning starts late, that increases the day one risk fairly quickly. The second that we have seen is more on the application ownership side, where buyers need to understand who owns the application, who supports them, where the integrations exist, are there any vendors involved, what are the licenses, implications of that, whether those licenses are transferable, are there any other kind of dependency on external vendors that we should be aware of. You've seen many situations where a business critical system technically belonged to the parent company and replacing it post-close became seven-figure surprise, which they never have thought of. And the third thing is more, I would say, around the data and the reporting dependency, because what happens is post kind of deal close, immediately the PEs want all the reportings that should come out from immediately from the first month itself, from their own system. They would like to see the financial data and all of that. So many carve-outs don't actually own their reporting environments or the ERP integrations or historical data structures. And when reporting breaks after the separation, the synergy realization shows almost immediately. So because of that slowness, I think its key is not just to understand what systems exist, but it is also just understanding what breaks when the separation actually begins. So that dependencies, what are the systems intertwined, where the things exist in silos or where the things are tightly connected, all of those things should be documented. The integrations, the data flows, which direction, what's going on, all of that things have to be documented, understood, and well digested before this happens. So what we have seen is many a time people take TSA as more like just a safety blanket. I would say it's more like a countdown clock. The day when it starts, you have to start planning, getting roll off the TSA as soon as possible. So I think that's really important.
And if we're not brought in early, I mean, I know we did a deal where we were brought in earlier in the conversation, but we were able to execute that 6 to 7 months ahead of schedule, saving several $1 million on those pre-exit kind of efforts. So again, good point, speed and execution on all of that. So all right, moving to stage 3. So now it is actually, we're executed, we've closed, and now we've actually separated the organization day 1 to the first kind of 100 days. So what is the highest leverage technology decision a Portco CFO can make in that first 100 days? And what's the most common one they get wrong? Miguel, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, I think it's critical to ensure that there's a strong IT decision authority and governance model prior to day 1. So many mid-market portfolio companies, they may not have a CIO or IT leadership or strong IT leadership. If that's the case, there's opportunities there and solutions, a fractional CIO model, that may make sense, or some governance layer managed, across the executive team or within the office of the CFO. So without this, things just tend to go out into the wild, right? So the default is that ID decisions fan out. You have operations buying what it needs, finance buying what it needs. At the end of the day, it's the loudest function fighting for those dollars, and they're getting the budget and implementing. And what ends up happening in this scenario is, what I call kind of a mushroom applications. They start to populate or throughout the organization, creating inefficiencies, increased cost of support, et cetera. And then it becomes a much bigger task later down the line from a modernization perspective. Another example is the governance over renewals, the licensing strategy. How does that, all kind of come into play as it relates to overall cost and getting to the expected outcome of the investment? So all of these needs to be governed. And again, as mentioned, this does not necessarily need to be an executive hire if that doesn't make sense, if the budget doesn't allow for it. There's fractional models, an operating partner for the private equity can be appointed, or from another third party. We talked about a CFO with a structured advisory layer. So what matters most really in this scenario is having a single accountable authority and owner for IT decisions, the ability to kind of prioritize, say no, bring up opportunity, identify risk, it really drive that roadmap.
Well, what is the most common mistake, Miguel, that you've seen?
One is, well, obviously not having this authority in place. And we do see the impact of that. It turns into a much costlier exercise after the fact. In addition to, when you look at the life cycle of the deal, when you talk about the TSA, for example, extending the TSA or treating it as a continuous, project or implementation plan, when the idea is to get off of it as quickly as possible, it sort of becomes a living, breathing roadmap, if you will, an IT strategy, which is not a good viable option here.
Okay, sure, yeah, got it. Pointing back to the previous effort. All right. So again, just still in stage 3 here. So Manan, let's go to you, right? So you've architected a lot of post-close platform consolidations. What's a quick win move? Kind of leading the question here on the slide, but what's a quick win move that pays back inside 90 days, and what should they not touch in year 1?
Interesting. So I think the biggest one is what we have seen with all this different kind of vendors and the SaaS platforms and all that the portcos have been using. So the fastest payback we consistently see is the SaaS and vendor optimization. Most mid-market portcos inherit years of unused licenses, overlapping platforms, shadow IT, unfavorable renewal terms when it comes to extending those contracts. So the first 90 days is all about simplifying just what kind of landscape that you have. Getting the visibility into the environment often uncovers immediate savings opportunities. And many times we have seen this kind of ranges. What you have is anywhere between 40 to 100K or so, maybe 120 at times. But what makes this most powerful is that it's a low risk. You can clearly quantify, it's measurable, and it gives CFO an early EBITDA win they can immediately take back to the sponsor. On the other side, the biggest mistake that we see is trying to aggressively modernize the core ERP or the operational platform too early in the overall transition. Year 1 often, I think, gets into a lot of changes. So once the acquisition is already full or in full swing, and we see that the organizational changes are happening, reporting changes are happening, and now you get into the process changes. If you destabilize the operational backbone simultaneously, the execution risk increases dramatically. So I think our approach is usually let's stabilize first, simplify after that, and modernize selectively after the operating model matures, because you want people to stabilize. I think the cost of change is way too high at times, so to be very careful with that. So Early value creation should reduce the operational friction and not really introduce more changes. There is a lot that is changing in the organization, and we shouldn't be just adding fuel to the fire.
Got it. Got it. Speaking of value creation, let's jump to stage 4, right? Manan, maybe continue with you. Right? There's so much now talking about AI. AI investment is up across portfolios. Right? What does it actually take to make AI productive in a portco environment? And where are firms wasting money? What are you seeing?
So this is very interesting. And now I see like anything without AI is incomplete these days. And what we have seen is this is more than just going beyond the generative AI or using any of these kind of applications that people are using for just getting some basic tasks done. The most AI initiatives fail long before actually the model becomes a problem. The real issue is the operational readiness. In most portcos, the data is fragmented across the ERP systems, different spreadsheets, and CRM platforms, and many kind of specialized uh, business systems, and then a lot of disconnected workflows that we see. Now, if all those operational foundations are not addressed at first, then AI simply accelerate the inconsistencies that have been brewing over a period of time. So that's one area. The second place firms waste money is broad experimentation without measurable business outcomes. Many a times you've seen many pilots that are there. Just give you a quick example. Talking with the CIO, they had like, oh, we got 11 pilots of AI, and out of which only one is kind of partially running in production. Now, why this happens? Because there is no kind of deep thought process on what business problems we are trying to solve and what kind of gains that we are getting. So we see that the organizations kind of buying enterprise AI licenses before defining which workflows they are improving, which KPIs they care about, and who owns the adoption. The highest performing portcos usually start very narrow. Financial reporting to start with, service task automation, procurement analytics, forecasting, and then getting into the workflow acceleration. They focus on use cases tied directly to labor efficiency, EBITDA improvements, or decision speed. So productive AI is usually less about the model, but it's more about the operational discipline and how you get the best value out of it.
Okay. Great. Miguel, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. We keep going.
No, I think Manan covered that very well.
All right. So again, staying on stage 4 here. Most PE-backed CFOs run lean, right? And maybe this kind of goes back to what you were saying before, and they don't have a CIO. What is the right governance model for an IT firm in the $25 to $100 million kind of portco that does not justify a full executive hire? What does that look like?
Yeah, so first, I do believe every organization should have IT leadership. Given the impact IT has on a business, we talked earlier about it being an enabler or prohibitive to growth. This is a requirement. There has to be a strong, validated, and enabling organizational design. So for many within, this market, in market 25 to 100 million, it's the questions about the how. Right. And one option is the fractional CIO model, with a fixed cadence. So the fractional CIO or this role, they own 3 things. Right? One is the roadmap. What is the IT strategy? How are we executing? Vendor management, cybersecurity risk, the posture. What's the framework? Day-to-day operations. That could be managed potentially by a managed services partner. But really the fractional CIO, their accountability is, lies within, the CFO, the board, and the delivery partner to ensure that, we're executing or the organization as a whole from a technology perspective is executing with excellence. So there's different cadences that work with that. There's monthly meetings with the CFO. I think the important thing here, though, is that, that fractional CIO, or if the CIO is hired, is they really have those real decision rights, the authority to manage technology as a whole, and really have a seat at the table. I think historically, IT kind of took a back seat to some of these decisions, but kind of given where it's at, and arguably, every organization is an IT organization at some level, given the emergence of technology. It's required and it's critical. And where it breaks is when these roles are advisory only, and when decisions are kind of enabled throughout the organization, because that's where you get a lot of the inconsistency and and lack of a strong and cohesive and integrated technology ecosystem.
I appreciate that. It's good. All right. So again, this is one of the major risks that everybody kind of sees out there. Cybersecurity, right? Vendor renewals, SaaS sprawl, they all compound over a hold period. How do you turn those from a quarterly fire drills, right, into an actual board pack metric? Manan, why don't you take that one?
Sure. I mean, you rightly said it's always a firefighting. So I think the biggest shift is moving these from the reactive ID issues into more like an operational matrix with a clear ownership and cadence. The first metric to have is to become visible. So in many organizations, cyber exposure, vendor renewals, SaaS usage are spread across different teams and spreadsheets. And so leadership never really get to see the full picture early enough to act on. So second is usually we recommend creating a kind of a simple composite operational risk view, kind of a 12-month forward calendar, which combines what sort of vendor renewals are coming up, what sort of price increase ranges that from a contract value perspective that we are seeing, and more like this composite view that combines the cyber posture, vendor exposure, renewal timings, SaaS utilization, and all of that. So that kind of single pane of glass gives you that composite view that you can actually, it's more like an operational thing that you can act on. And really the goal is not to create like a 200 odd metrics that somebody has to just fiddle around. It's just helping leadership to understand where the operational exposure is increasing, where the unnecessary spend exists, and where the action is required before it becomes disruptive. And the third thing is, I'd say, visibility. And you have to be very careful in terms of how to define that. Board doesn't need every operational detail just for you to spend tens of slides to board to just digest the information. What they need to do is, are we improving? Are we accumulating the risk? Or are we just drifting operationally quarter over quarter? Once those kind of trends become measurable and reoccurring, these kind of stop becoming quarterly fire drills and start becoming more like the managed operational levers. So ultimately, the goal is operational predictability and fewer surprises. If we can contain that, I think that will make the overall operations quite smooth, and that will be able to land for just more kind of a overall transformation eventually.
Great. Miguel, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think Manan spoke a lot about metrics, and I think metrics only matter when there's a named owner, there's a review cadence, and we all know that what gets measured gets managed, and a documentation or a documented action threshold. So for each of these metrics, who's the owner, what's the review cadence, whether that be with the CFO, the board, other ELT members, what's the escalation rule? So when a metric breaks a threshold, what action is triggered, who's accountable for that action, as opposed to a team, Slack, water cooler type discussion, right? These things need to be actionable and actioned on. And this is really what converts a metric, from a status update into an operating control. And those make their way into, board presentations and board meetings, et cetera, because it really, provides that direction and guidance on how technology is being managed within the organization.
Great. Good add. Okay, jumping into stage 5 here, add-ons, integration, etc. Question: What does a repeatable integration playbook look like, and how would that differ from just a tuck-in versus transformative kind of add-on to companies?
Right. So I think you really need to understand, the organization and what what the objective is. So a tuck-in, for example. So, if we're looking at under 25% of revenue, maybe the objective is to standardize on a platform. The financial systems, security, tooling, all of that within the first 90 days. It's really about speed. Maybe you leave the operational systems alone for 6 months or a longer period of time. You don't want to mess with their ERP, for example. So really the platform absorbs the tuck-in, if you will. And it's really about speed, and that matters, over perfection in this scenario. Transformative, different ball game, right? It's greater than 25% of the platform revenue. It could be a different business model. So this should be treated as a merger, and not necessarily an acquisition. So really the post-merger integration planning is important here. Pre-LOI architecture, a review, named integration leads. The TSA really comes into play here. You're probably looking at maybe a 180-day minimum from a TSA perspective, and really understanding, how these systems integrate and how they'll kind of lead to a future state. So that is critical. Where the pain materializes in these scenarios is, when they start, just becoming add-ons without a well-defined strategy, right? So how are you absorbing this into the existing stack? What are the third-party identity management, financial reporting consolidation capabilities? How are those managed and measured? The integration playbook, that either exists at a point to, create value, or to allow for, value leakage. And really it's about getting ahead of that.
Got it. So just have it operationalized.
Right.
Before you get into that.
Right.
Good. Yeah. All right. Stage 6, right? Exit. We've done all the work, value creation. We're going into exit, right? So what does an exit-ready IT estate look like? What's on the diligence checklist, right? That the next buyer is going to look at, and now they're going to run with it.
Right. Having gone through this a few times ourselves, so I do think exit ready means, 3 things, right? Documented, defensible. So the first is financial visibility. So how's IT spend mapped across the EBITDA drivers? It's not buried in shared services or some other, line item. It's clear, defensible, and well understood. Security posture. So we all know that security risk, cyber risk is an increasing threat to value and value protection. So Manan talked about the fair assessment quantification. So really what's, where do we stand from that perspective? What's our posture? Is our cyber insurance in good standing? Have we had any material breaches or incidents within the past 24 months? So all of that is critical to valuation during exit. Dependency clarity. So there's no founder dependent systems, is what we call them. No expiring contracts, for example, within 12 months of exit, which may create risk or a scramble. There's no critical applications at end of life. The licensing strategy is well defined. All of these things really come to play when it comes to being exit ready and capturing the most value out of the transaction. Some things that I think are kind of get in the way of recognizing that value, that were predictable and preventable on the onset. Open or recent cybersecurity risks. Those certainly provide risk to the buyer, et cetera, and certainly can impact the valuation. IT spend is a little out of control, so maybe it's above the benchmark. Critical systems are end of life, or there's not a good integration, consolidation, modernization strategy. So the buyer is going to have to carry that or assume that risk and that burden and that technical debt going forward. So all of these things, kind of get in the way, I would say, or introduce risk into the transaction or the valuation of the transaction. So we, recommend that, maybe 12 to 18 months prior to exit, all of these things really start to take shape, right? There's a lot of thought, there's a strategy, there's an exit strategy, when it's to be done, the cadence, the ownership, the accountability. In addition, that timing does allow to remediate, issues, modernize, reduce technical debt, get your IT spend aligned and in a better spot. So all of these things, again, come into play when we talk about exit ready.
Yeah, it's funny, Miguel, you talk about, we work with a lot of PE, portcos, they're already owned by PEs, they're driving these EBITDA standards. And I continue to want to educate a lot of the investment bankers and, the ones that are finding the deals originally and or those founder-led companies that need to be thinking about exiting, 12 to 18 months later, capturing the deal before you're going to go and sell, right? So again, that kind of gets into the even LOI, right? Working with the actual sellers themselves and looking at those that value creation. So listen, I know we've covered a lot. We're not done yet, but I just want to offer up kind of the opportunity for if anybody has any questions to drop them in the chat now. Hopefully we can get to a couple of those. But as we kind of wrap up here, I just want to kind of position this real quick, right? If every PE firm, portfolio, CFO, individuals watching this session did one thing differently in the next 90 days based on this conversation, what would each of you tell them? Again, one thing, if you can keep it to that tight, what's the one thing that you would tell them to do? Manan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, let me tell you from more technology perspective or technical perspective. One thing I would recommend for the next 90 days would be create a foundational operational visibility before driving the transformation. Most PE-backed companies are operating with fragmented visibility across their infrastructure, SaaS platforms, vendor dependencies, cyber security exposures, and business critical application. Without getting that visibility, technology decisions become reactive instead of intentional. And that's usually where the execution risk and the value leakage begins. So the highest priority portcos are highest performing portcos are typically not the ones that are making the biggest technology investments. Those are the one who is getting the operational clarity kind of outshines. So understand the application ownership, renewal exposure, integration dependencies, data qualities, and the kind of operational risk concentration, all things that I've been talking in this. Once these foundations exist, decision around AI, modernization, improving the overall integration, automations, and optimization becomes significantly more effective and far less disruptive. So I would just simply summarize that. Technical discipline early in the hold period compounds the operational value later on. So that's all that you should be focusing on from our perspective.
Miguel?
Yeah, good question. I think my gut reaction was to jump to something related to execution, but I do think it kind of steps back to appointing an IT decision authority day one. So when you think of the cost of the overall transaction, this is pretty low. And again, full-time hire, operational partner, operating partner as an advisor, fractional CIO, but really having someone without authority to really help drive and govern IT execution and planning. And really, this is the difference between IT as a controllable cost or a cost center and a value creation lever. So when we really think of the benefit and the impact technology is having today, with IT leadership, strong IT leadership, a strong governance model, you could really set the foundation and the plan, an executable plan to really drive that value. And then in addition, once the value is created, it's about value protection as well. So how you continuously evolving that technology ecosystem. And what's critical in this situation is ensuring there's IT authority and that those decisions are not kind of left out into the business, not governed, if you will. Of course, they have input. But it's really about how do you ensure that your end state doesn't become a non-integrated mess, if you will, littered with technical debt, because that does impact value at exit.
Right. Listen, I know it was my question too, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, right, for my answer on this, if I was leaving them with one thing, it's the math, right? I mean, every dollar of IT-driven margin, right, is worth roughly $10, right? 10 times, 12 times multiples of enterprise value at exit. So that's not aspirational. This is what the work really delivers when it's done right If you treat IT as a value creation work stream, it's not a cost center, and the multiple takes care of itself. Right? So the firms outperforming, on portfolio EBITDA right now are doing exactly that. Everything else is leaving money on the table. So, with that, we'll close out. For those of you that don't know who Synoptek is, right? At Synoptek, we believe that the very standard for managed service providers has changed. It's no longer just about uptime, maintaining operations. It's about being a catalyst for growth and agility. The reality demands a new kind of partner, a managed experience provider. So we deliver this by leveraging a series of interconnected pillars, right? So first, the foundational layer, cloud and agile infrastructure. This is where we design, manage your complete technology stack. Optimizing the infrastructure is critical as it powers a real-time, personalized experience and gives you your applications the scale and the resilience they need. Of course, if you move up the stack, on the second pillar, right, includes business applications, platforms. Here we build and implement, right, off the shelf, as well as custom applications that run your business. And this unlocks the ROI and that value creation we've talked about. And finally, because the technology only delivers value when people adopt it, our third pillar really focuses on the customer and employee experience. We craft intuitive interactions that really delight your customers, internal and external, and drive higher productivity for your employees. And these pillars, they don't work in isolation. They're powered by data at the core, of course, Manan's point. It's optimized by AI, protected by our best-in-class cybersecurity and our advisory-led services. And really, this creates a flywheel, right? It's cloud infrastructure powers the apps. The apps justify that infrastructure. Great experience to drive adoption. Security keeps you in business, and our advisors lead the way. And this is how we make IT a strategic differentiator for you, create that value. And the power is a managed experience provider. And so with that, I'll just leave you. If you have any questions on any of this, reach out to me directly. We provide a complimentary executive diagnostic on Portco CFOs and the environment. We actually will even do an in-person 4-hour workshop complimentary for those Portcos. We feel like if an executive team is willing to sit down with us, we'll sit down with you for a half day, really dig in to decide, does it make sense to go to the next level for a paid assessment to really drive in additional value. And so with that, again, I'll leave you all. Thank you for the time. Feel free to schedule an executive diagnostic, 60 minutes complimentary. Thank you for everybody joining us, and we'll see you at the end. Take care. See you on the next deal. Miguel, Manan, thank you for today.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.